Okay. My name is Jerry Gill. Today is December 16th, 2008. I'm visiting with B. Curtis Bob Hamm in the library of the Oklahoma State University campus in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This interview is for the O State Storage Project, which is part of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Bob, appreciate you taking time to be with us today. A lot of ways we can start, but I'd like to just kind of back up maybe from the beginning. Can you tell me, Bob, a little bit about where you grew up, your family, some things that influenced you early in your life?
Yes, I was born in Oklahoma City, went to Capitol High School, Lee Gray School, and was greatly influenced, as I said in my, when I was inducted into the Oklahoma Higher Education Hall of Fame, I was greatly influenced by my fourth grade teacher, because she in those days they gave you IQ tests. Not only that, they told you, you have an IQ that we're going to put you in a special class. My brother, I remember they told him, you don't have it, so we'll put you in the vocational class. And so there were about 12 of us in that higher IQ and class. And she took us to the Civic Center. She gave us tickets to ride on the bus to go to Shakespeare movies and plays and stuff and concerts. She really looked after us. She had a major influence on us. And I thought, if I ever get to be a teacher, I want to be the kind that looks after my students, based on that fourth grade teacher experience. And her name was Miss Jane. The rumor was that she was a Native American princess. And as I like to say, I don't know whether she was or not. At that age, we didn't know. But she was our princess. That's all we cared about. And my dad was a sheet metal worker. During World War II, he was putting a sheet metal on airplanes. My mother was a buyer for John A. Brown's company, the largest department store in Oklahoma at that time. And she bought for children's and boys department. So she influenced me in the marketing area, the retailing. My aunt, who was a world traveler, influenced me in wanting to see the world. She was on the last ship that left Shanghai, 1937, before the Japanese invaded. So she came home with home movies, and my desire, even as a little boy, was to go to China and see it. And of course, later on, we got to do that as a Fulbright scholar in China. And we also went there for one day to in 1980 to see Sun Yat-sen University. And then when I went back in 84 and 85, we went to the same hotel that my aunt stayed in 1937. Never had changed. Now, if you go back today, that hotel is gone and new hotels are there. But in 1985, the old hotels were still there. Then in and my dad, who was not a believer in higher education, he said, man is not worth anything, he wears a tie. And they live off the rest of us who are the common laborers. And so I had to, knowing this, I had to get a job in high school. And I was a janitor at a local insurance company to save up my money. And I was able to go my first year at OSU. And I lived in first year that Bennett Hall was open. It was the first year that the library was open, and the first year that the student union was open. So when I came up here, I was impressed by 3 brand new buildings.
Oh, huge building.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, let me come back and ask you, what influenced you to come to Oklahoma State? Was there some story there?
Yeah, not really so much. I really wanted. This sounds terrible. But I really wanted to go to Texas A&M because I was impressed by their marching band.
A lot of people are.
Yeah, and but out-of-state tuition and other things, and my best friend, one of the 16, I was the only one who actually graduated from college out of those students.
Wow.
But my roommate at OSU actually came from Capitol too, but he flunked out because he joined a fraternity, and he ended up being a colonel in the Air Force.
Oh.
And that was when you could become a pilot without a commission, without a diploma degree. Yeah. So he did that. But anyway, since he came up here and I could afford it, that was a major consideration.
So your dad relented then, let you go.
Well, he didn't care if I went. He just didn't want to be responsible for paying any of the money for it.
Did you pay with scholarships the rest of your way through, Bob?
We didn't have any scholarships, really. I worked at Bennett Hall as a dorm counselor. I worked in the kitchen. Actually, in those days, you got free football tickets, and I could sell my ticket for 50 cents. And you can't do that, of course, today, but in those days you could. And 50 cents was enough money to take a girl to the movie, so that was important to me.
More important than the ticket. That's great.
Yeah, more important than the football game, as far as I was concerned. Anyway.
Well, we're going this direction, Bob. Maybe just kind of keep going. How about your undergraduate experience at Oklahoma State?
Oh, it was absolutely fantastic. I got involved. In fact, the first semester I was here, I ran for a class office. We don't have those anymore either, and lost. But it encouraged me, and I ended up being president of what they called in those days the Independent Men's Residence Hall Council, and the Residence Hall Association president. And I got my mother told me that she had an intern from OSU who was a Blue Key member, and she said, when you go to OSU, or actually Oklahoma A&M College in those days, she said, I want you to join that Blue Key group because they're really a sharp group. Mm-hmm. So as a freshman, I came up here and I said, I want to join up with Blue Key. How do you do that? And everybody laughed, and they said, well, that's for juniors and seniors who are leaders on campus, and probably you don't qualify for that right now. So they were right, of course. So I waited 2 years, and my junior year, I got accepted in Blue Key, and I was just terrifically proud of it. And I was so proud of that later on when I came back as a professor, I became the advisor for Blue Key for over 20 years. So that had a long history to it.
Well, hold on, 'cause I want to come back to that and some other things. I want to talk about when you work in student organizations, but let's back up. What about some of your academic? Did you major in marketing?
Majored in marketing. I've always majored in marketing.
So you started right off in marketing.
And that was that influence of. There were two influences in my life. One was my mother's business, the John A. Brown Company. There was a guy there who took a liking to me, and he didn't have any children, and so he would spend time with me, showing me John A. Brown's, how they bought things, took me to the market. He did all kinds of things, bought me clothes actually, and right before he died of cancer, they were opening up a new store in Penn Square, and he said, I want you to go with me, and I had to hold his arm. He was so weak, but he wanted to see that store, and I thought, boy, merchandisers, they love their work, you know. And of course, they worked in those days 6.5 days a week, depending on holidays and things. But nobody seemed to care. I mean, they were just glad to have the work in 1940s and early 1950s. But anyway, I always majored in marketing. 3 times I did that.
Well, do you remember some of your faculty that
absolutely.
taught you? Could you share some stories
there? Yeah, it's really interesting because I didn't have any scholarships. In fact, we didn't have very many scholarships in those days. That most of us worked if you needed extra money or needed money to go to school. And I carefully planned this out. I was in ROTC. That paid $50 a month. And then I was a dorm counselor. And then they asked me, I was walking across campus, and this Professor Zimmerman was his name. He yelled out the window, Bob, come in here. And so I went in there, and he said, we need somebody to teach 10-key adding machine, if you can imagine, in our computer world today. He says, I want you to teach 2 classes on 10-key adding machine. And I didn't know much about 10-key adding machines, but I thought, well, okay. So I went in. He showed me how to do it. He said, and this is a 1 hour credit. This is what it pays. So with my $50 plus my counseling fee plus my dorm deal plus these two classes, and when I graduated in 1955, I had $2.64 left over. And I thought, God really has looked after me. He didn't give me more than I needed. Just gave me $2.64 left over.
Bob, I'm trying to think in the early 50s, what were the student hotspots, the hangouts? You talking about taking your day, I guess the old Leachman Theater was there.
Yeah, the Aggie Theater downtown, the Leachman was right on the corner. And my favorite story about that is Don Dickerson, who was also lived in the dorm.
Mm-hmm.
He and his later on wife, and the girl I was dating was a girl named Karen Carson, but everybody called her Kit Carson. And so we double dated. And you try to make friends with somebody who had a car. Of course, we didn't have a car because we didn't have the money. But there was a guy there who had a Ford, 39 Ford, and he didn't date much. So we were all really nice to him, hoping we could borrow his car. So we borrowed it one Saturday night, and he said, there's a little trick to it. And I said, well, I'm not going to drive it anyway. I'm sure Don know how to drive it. So Don got in front. Sure enough, he knew how to drive it. We went to the movie, we came out, it was pouring down rain. So we all four of us piled into the car, and he couldn't get it to start. And there was a little mechanism you push down or up to engage it, and then you turn the key. It just wouldn't start. And it was getting curfew time for the girls. They were living over in Murray Hall. And so we thought, we got to get the girls back, but it's pouring down rain. And like I say, we didn't have a lot of money, so we both pooled our money. And we had enough money to take a taxi. And there was a taxi right by the Leachman Theater. And so we went over and asked him to take us over to Murray Hall. And also in those days, when you went on a date, you'd wear maybe a suit and tie. And so both of us had on our suit and ties. So we got the girls over there, and there was a little light. And I remember there was a light bulb up there, and the tall guys would undo it. So it'd be dark, so you could give the girls a kiss. And I, of course, fully expected to get one that night, but I didn't because we were just soaking wet. And the girls ran on in, and so the taxi driver said, "Give me drive you guys on home." And we looked at each other, and Don and I, neither one of us had any money, and we said, "Oh no, it's a nice evening, we'll just walk." So we walked from Murray Hall all the way across campus in our suits. And the next day, we didn't go to church because we only had one suit, and it was all wet. So that was, and you couldn't go to church, well, you could, but you wouldn't go to church in those days without a suit and tie. So we missed church the next day because of that. And Don is now deceased, but we used to, every time we'd see each other, we'd always joke, "You got any money for a taxi?" And that was our joke with each other.
Okay. So was Aggie B going strong in those days?
Yes.
Was that one of the favorites?
Swims was big. And we'd go there and have a Coke.
Mm-hmm.
But our most popular place to hang out was the student union.
Sure, just open.
We went up to the 4th floor, and they had sock hops in those days, and those were free.
Mm-hmm.
So and everything more revolved around the campus in those days. So we liked that because you could walk over to the dorm, pick them up, walk over to student union for a nickel, get a Coke, go up and have a dance, sit down and have a Coke, and then you could walk them back over there. You didn't spend very much money, and we didn't have much, so that worked out really good.
Yeah, there was old Melmac cups and nickel cup coffee also.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Coffee was cheap in those days.
Oh, yeah.
It was at $3.95, I'll tell you that. And well, we were making 50 cents an hour working the dorm, and so by that analogy would cost you 8 hours of work for a cup of coffee in modern day.
Well, Bob, can you trace a little bit when you graduated, get your degree? Tell us a little bit your career from there to when you come back to Oklahoma State.
Okay, well, when we 1955 we graduated, and it was a time in which we had just finished the Korean War. And so those of us who were in ROTC, and we were in ROTC for two reasons, but one is because everybody was very patriotic in those days. You know, we were defending our country against the communists, and that was very important. My brother, who was with the 5th Reconnaissance Combat Team in Korea, kept sending me messages, get out of ROTC, too many lieutenants are dying over here. And in fact, half of the class of West Point, 51 or 52, they all died in Korea. But anyway, I graduated, and they didn't need us for what they thought they did, so they gave us a 6-month active duty, and then 11-year, I think it was 7 years, and the reserves. So I went to Fort Benning, finished the basic officers course. Then I wanted to go overseas because I had that desire, but they sent me to Fort Riley, Kansas, which was not exactly overseas. It was in the boondocks, but not overseas. And I served with the 1st Infantry Division there. And then I got out and joined the 95th Infantry for 11 years, and ended up being a captain. That was as high as I went. And the reason why I got out was because by that time I was in graduate school, and I had a chance to take student groups to Europe in the summer, and that looked more fun than 2 weeks at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas.
So you were in active duty.
Yeah,
about less than a year.
Less than a year, and then we were on reserve for 7 years. That was our obligation.
Did you? How soon did you go to graduate school after that, Bob? Did you get?
Well, right after, as soon as I came back, I went to work for IBM, but it took about a month to get a job. So I understand how it feels to be out of a job and need a job. And so I went down, and I was in the Army in those days. You got $240 a month as a second lieutenant, and I spent about 100 of it 1 month, the last month, for a new suit, and it was a gray suit, and I had a white shirt and the right tie, a rep tie. And so I went down to interview IBM, and I was early because everybody said, don't be late for your job interview. So I was standing outside the building at IBM, and all of a sudden a pigeon came over, and I remember dropped something on my shoulder, and I thought, oh my, I'm not supposed to get this job. So I had to go to the men's room and get that all cleaned up. And by that time it's my appointment. So I went to appointment, and they looked at me and they said, what happened on your shoulder? And I told them the story, and they died laughing. They said, well, normally we don't accept people who come in like that, but you're being an exception. So I came in and interviewed for this job and took a test, of course. IBM made you take a test. So I took this test, and they interviewed 27 people. I was the second highest on the test. And I really wanted this job. You can imagine being out of a job and having a new car and all those kind of things. So I really wanted this job, so I called and I said, how'd I do on the test? And they said, you were number 2 out of 27. And I said, well, I'd really like to have this job. And they said, well, that the manager's wife is in the hospital. Well, I didn't know it, but she was having a lady operation that you have at a certain age. And they said, well, she's in the hospital, and so he can't respond. I said, well, I'll call back tomorrow. I called back every day for 8 days, and finally, the assistant manager said, well, why don't you just come on to work, because you show more persistence than anybody else. So that's why I got the job.
Great.
I worked there 5 years.
What city were you assigned?
Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City.
And so on a Friday, in those days, things were different. They come in on Friday and they said, well, we're transferring you to New York City and on Monday you'll be up there in New York City, so get your plane ticket and show up. Well, I had started my MBA at OU. Actually, it wasn't an MBA, it was Master's in Economics. And I'd taken 9 hours. But then they had announced that OSU was going to have the first MBA in the state. So I really wanted to come back and get my MBA. And so when I saw this as a sign that I should, get an MBA, so I asked him if I could have a leave of absence and not go to New York City because I was engaged and I was active in my church and a lot of things. I wasn't wanting to do that. And they said, well, go get your MBA, then come back, and then we'll promote you. And I said, okay. So I came up here, got my MBA degree, and again, you always need a little extra money. And they said, well, since you work for IBM, you can teach computers. So I moved from 10-key adding machine to computers, teaching the class.
That's great.
And which worked out pretty nicely, actually. And so they were ranking professors and grades, and so my ratings were higher than anybody in the business school. So they said, well, you ought to get a PhD and come back and teach. And I said, oh, I'm not smart enough to do that because I held professors in very high regard, And they said, and so I went to see a Professor Zimmerman again, my old professor, because he was very honest with us. He was not politically correct by today's standards. He told you, you're either good or bad or ugly or whatever. So I went to see him and I said, Professor Zimmerman, and he didn't have a doctorate degree, but I said, Professor Zimmerman, the head of the marketing department told me I should get a PhD and come back and teach for you guys. And I said, I need your opinion. And he looked at me and he smiled. And he said, what's your reservations? And I said, well, I'm concerned that I don't have what it takes to get a doctorate degree. And he said, well, Bob, I've known you for a long time. You're not the most brilliant person I've ever met, but with your personality, you'll talk them out of one. I'd go ahead and go and get it if I were you. And so that's how I did that. But when I finally, after 4 years at the University of Texas, I came back. Well, they had changed the dean, they changed department heads, they had changed presidents. Bob Kahn was the new president, Dick Poole was the new dean, and Wayne Meinhardt was the new department head. So I came up here and I said, I'm supposed to have a job here. Well, Dick Poole was in Colorado. Wayne Meinhardt said, well, I don't know, I haven't hired anybody, but I understand that you wanted to come. And Bob Kahn didn't know anything about it either. And I said, well, just give me the forms. So they gave me the forms, I filled it out, and Wayne signed it, and then the underlings for everybody else signed it because they weren't here. So that's how I got my job, was just came up here and started.
Well, now, did you do your doctorate at University of Texas?
University of Texas, yeah.
Finished it up.
And when I was down there, I had fortunately, the same positive experience. I was selected because of they had a student survey, and I was selected as the outstanding teacher at the University of Texas in the business school, which I always prided myself on that because they have some truly outstanding people. But it's more than just knowledge in your head. You've got to be able to pass it on to students too. But anyway, that's how that got started.
Well, see, so you come back to Oklahoma State. Was there trying to make your story you were talking about earlier, though? How did you know there's an opening available at Oklahoma State?
Well, every time I would go to a meeting, academic meeting, I'd see Dick Poole or I'd see somebody, and they'd always say, "Well, we're looking forward to you coming when you graduate." So I knew. I mean, it's sort of like, you kept saying, well, let's have a date. Well, pretty soon you think, well, they won't have a date. Well, they kept saying all the time I was down there, we want you to come up and teach for us when we get through. So I took them at their word.
Showed up and said, here I am.
Yeah, and I just showed up and said, here I am. But I had offers from Penn State and Colorado. And it was difficult at that time to find professors. I mean, OSU was glad I came because they needed somebody. And I tell you how bad they needed somebody. They had a doctoral student from OU driving up here teaching a class.
Ooh.
And they were just delighted that I was coming because I was an OSU person and get rid of that OU person.
Saved the department.
Exactly.
Well, Bob, you come back, you had a pretty fast rise. I mean, you come back in '66, is that right?
Yeah, 66.
And then I think in '69 you were promoted to Director of Graduate Studies.
Yeah, but what happened was, that's sort of an interesting period, because it was a decline of the faculty had been there for a long time, and a lot of them had not, frankly, had not kept up with the literature. They were not really as current as they were, and in marketing, they only had me and one other person, and he was an older person. In fact, a couple of years later, he died of a heart attack. But he was not. He had some eyesight problem, which made it difficult to read. He didn't always keep up, and so when I came, I started teaching graduate courses, and then. Which is sort of an interesting story, because
which is a little unusual when you
first year, yeah,
teach graduates, right?
But and I remember that class so well, because I tried to do the same thing we did at the University of Texas, which was, of course, probably a mistake in some people's eyes. So a week before class started, I put a syllabus on my door and put an assignment. And of course, students didn't come by and look at your door, the assignment, but there it was. So the first day of class, I walked in and I said, "Okay, turn in your papers for today." Well, of course, nobody had any papers for the day, and I said, "Is there some question here?" I asked to turn the papers in. Nobody's sitting them down here to the front, and somebody finally said, "Well, Professor," he said, "what assignment are you talking about?" I said, "The one that was posted on my door." And I said, "That's normal procedure for graduate classes. You don't want to come to class on the first day, which is 3 hours, and call your name out and give you a syllabus and leave. We can't waste that much time." And I said, "You're not prepared today." And so I said, "Well, since you're not prepared, I'll go ahead and lecture." So I lectured for an hour and a half, and I gave them a break. Well, at the break, there was 16 of them went down and dropped the class, and I had 16 left. So the next day, I got a call from the associate dean, and he said, call me in, and he said, "Bob, are you aware how many students dropped out of your class yesterday?" And I said, "Well, there were only 16 at the end of the class. There were 32 at the first," but I said, 32 students is too many for a graduate class anyway. So now I've got it down to a good size. And he said, "Well, what are you doing in that class?" And I said, "Upholding high expectations." And he said, "Well, tell me about the class." And I said, "Are you telling me, questioning my teaching techniques and what I'm saying? Because if you are, I want to have a lawyer here from the ACLU." And he looked at me really funny. He said, "Oh, no, I would never do that. Just continue on." And so one of the assignments was that they had to write an article, 12-page articles, and submit it for publication. And if they didn't have it finished by the semester, they had to at least have the article ready. They didn't have to be submitted. Out of that 16 students, 4 of them had articles published. And I told them, I said, would you have published an article and have your name now in an article if you hadn't had that as an assignment? And then they realized what I was trying to say to them. We're raising the bar on graduate studies at Oklahoma State University. And that became quite a topic of conversation on the university, that he requires students to write articles at the master's level. But we were so successful, we kept that up. Students, ever since 1966, have been writing articles.
As Director of Graduate Studies, there some other changes you made?
Oh yeah, tremendously.
Yeah, a lot of just some key ones come to your mind.
Yeah, well, we increased the requirements for statistics and math. That was one of the major things we did. But all the classes were, the whole MBA program raised the bar level. That was one of the best things we did, in hiring new faculty members. outstanding people from all over the country. Great programs, and I think that was one of. At the same time, though, I was the person who wrote the original doctoral program, and we developed the doctoral program. And I was served on that committee, and I was chairman of that committee. And then later on, I wrote the one and managed the one for marketing and management and finance for a while. And then I did just the marketing one after that.
Bob, let's see, I'm trying to think, you also, your accomplishment was in 74, you moved into business extension.
Right.
Director of that program. Yeah. And there must have been some insights. You worked with the business community and corporate leaders.
Right. Well, what happened was Dick Poole, who was the dean, was involved with NASA in Houston. And so I got a call one day, and he said, we need somebody in management at NASA, and they want to hire you as a consultant. Well, I was elated, but I couldn't see any relative contribution I could make. And he said, well, it's in management. Go down and talk to him. So I flew down to Houston to the Johnson Spacecraft Center. And they wanted to have somebody to train the young executives who worked in the spacecraft industry. And so I wrote some case studies on how to do that. They had a device called a solar simulator, and they take the cone of the spaceship and put it in that, and then they push the switch, and all these carbon arc rods would come on. It simulated the power of the sun. They did that, and when they pushed the lever and it all came on, it blew up. And so this was a perfect case study. Should you go back and hire that firm over and pay them millions of dollars to build another one, or should you go to another contractor? And so we wrote that case up. And then when these young guys came in, went to work for NASA, then we used that as a case study for them to do that. And so that sort of helped me as a Oklahoman put on my record as a consultant to NASA for a year that this guy can consult with big corporations. Meanwhile, the Phi Gamma Delta fraternity had decided to initiate me as a graduate brother because they needed an advisor. Now, how does that relate to consulting? Well, one of the first things that happened, you get a ring showing your membership in the fraternity. And so I got a call one day from a lawyer who said, would you come and talk to us? We're interested in talking to you about location analysis. So I go down to Muskogee, and this lawyer and I are talking about putting in a new bank. And he said, are you knowledgeable about location analysis? And I said, yeah, I have a PhD in marketing. And he said, do you know how to do a location analysis for a bank? And I said, oh yeah, that's one of my specialties. Well, before I went down there, I'd gone to the library and got a book on it. So, specialties, somebody read the book, So he looked at me and he saw my ring. He said, are you a Fiji? And I said, yes. He said, well, you're hired. And so I started developing a career in banking and did that from 1967, till now. I mean, still doing bank consulting work. So anyway, I really enjoyed making the relationship between the real world and the classroom. I thought it made it much more real for the students. And so I try to bring in my consulting work and show them that here's a concept, here's an application for the concept. Now, when you are in your own industry, you will take that concept and you'll be looking at problems, and then you'll say, what concept will help me solve the problem? And I think that was a real learning experience for the student. Well, that relationship with the community led Dean Miller, who was at that time the new dean. We did not have a real outreach program for business. And so he told me that he was going to appoint me to be the director of the first real executive and professional development group. Clayton Millington had that job, but he was primarily interested in economic education. By accident, more than anything else, they had $64,000 in outreach programs for business. $64,000. So I took that over, and I had an assistant, Jim Romas, and one secretary. And at the end of 6 years, when I left there in 1980, we had almost $800,000 in revenue coming in. Now it's in the millions of dollars. But it started in 1968 or 69.
Bob, were those contacts really valuable for the College of Business that you made with industry?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I would go to these banks and tell them that we had this seminar. And the bank would say, okay, we want a one-day seminar. I'd go back. I'd develop the one-day seminar. I'd go teach the seminar. I'd pick up the check for the seminar, came back and put it in the pocket. And then eventually we got enough money. I mean, this is what you do in a small business. You get enough money ahead that you can hire people who are experts on that. Then I didn't have to kill myself. I was giving speeches for $25 and driving from Stillwater to Bartlesville or Fort Gibson, Oklahoma, or Woodard, or I was going everywhere for $25 because we had to get the word out. And I learned a great lesson there because the guy said to me one day, he said, at first I was just talking about how great OSU is in the College of Business at OSU. And the guy came to me and he said, I came to hear you tonight because I was hoping you were going to say something I could use. I already know Oklahoma State's a really good school. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, I was hoping you were going to say something that would help me in my business. And that totally changed my orientation to public speaking. So when I'd go, from then on, I'd go out and give speeches. I changed it, and I said, here are some of the latest ideas and thoughts that may help you in your business. And I'd give 4 or 5, or maybe 3, depending whatever the number was at the time. And I said, here are 3 major new concepts. Well, then that encouraged those business people to want to come back and use OSU for programs. And that's why I think we were so successful, is we did a lot of one-on-one with people.
Bob, is there anything, there are some highlights in your teaching and your faculty and administrative career at Oklahoma State. Can you trace that? So you retired in...
Well, actually, the people joke about me. I've retired every other year, but I retired officially in 1990. In 1990, I was promoted from assistant to associate professor in 2 years,
Right.
And then associate to full professor in 5 years. So there really wasn't any major goals ahead. That's why I wanted to take on I was glad to take on administrative responsibilities. But and then I was a Fulbright professor to China for a year. I was in Jordan for a year on USAID, and I was on semester C going around the world. I did all those kind of things, and I just didn't want to stay here so long that people would say, oh my God, is he still there, So in 1990, I was offered a job as Associate Dean for Graduate Studies at Oklahoma City University. They wanted to beef up their program, and they wanted me to come down and help them. And it turned out I did that for a couple of years, but mostly what I was doing was running their MBA program around the world. And I went everywhere from Argentina to Russia to China and Malaysia and Singapore and all kinds of places for them. I did that for 5 years, and then I developed cancer. So I took off about 2 years, and then OSU said, well, since you live here, we need you to come back and teach again. So I came back as a professor emeritus, and then I started teaching 2 classes. And I did that for several years. Then I, quote, retired again. And then a couple of years later, Kurt Gill, who was or is the CEO of the OSU Foundation, called me and he said, "I'd like to hire you to come and work for the foundation for a year." Now I'm in my third year of doing that. So,
well, Bob, one thing I want to back up in your career and pick up, in addition to your administrative responsibilities, your teaching responsibilities, you were for many years were actively involved in with student organizations. As faculty advisor, as in different capacities, and you were known for a lot of those things through the years. Could you share a little bit of some of your work with student organizations and kind of how you felt about that and what it meant to you?
Yeah, student organization to me is like frosting on the cake. When I was a young guy, I used to go to movies on Saturdays for 10 cents, and they'd show movies about college campuses. And they always looked so intriguing to me because we just didn't have any money. And I thought, boy, look at that. Those people were dressed. They had those really cool sweaters on, and they're driving convertibles, and professors are so nice, and they're having teas, and the fraternities are 40. That was long before Animal House, But anyway, so I thought when I get there, well, because I had worked for IBM, which I still consider one of the most professional companies in the world to work for, I believed in work. My dad was, a hard labor union worker, and so I believed you all get to the office at 8 o'clock, and you all stay till 5, and you teach classes, and your students would, if you do a good job, students come and ask you to be their advisor. So I was advisor to Delta Sigma Pi Business Fraternity. I was advisor to Business Student Council for several years, and I always tried this. And there's something that about me that I want you keep continuing to improve. And Business Student Council is an example. They had a little banquet for students, and they'd have like 40 people come. And I said, well, you need to have a big banner. You need to have tickets that are the same color as a banner. You need to have programs. You need to bring in some really dynamic speaker. And we started doing it pretty soon. We filled the ballroom, 700 people come to these banquets. It became a huge deal. And one of my saddest stories of the years that I was at OSU was one night I got a phone call from a student I'd never met, didn't know, but he knew a person that I knew. And he called me up and he said, I need to talk to you. And I said, well, great. And I said, come in tomorrow. And he said, no, I need to talk to you right now. And I said, I can't. I've got to go Business Student Council having a banquet. In fact, it was the night that Martin Luther King got assassinated. So I said, I can't. I'm in charge of this banquet. We've got 700 people coming. I've got to go. And I said, call me tomorrow and we'll get together. And I said, or call me after I'll be through about 10:30. Call me then. Well, anyway, when I got home at 10:30, he never called, and I found out he committed suicide that night. And that has affected me a lot. That people need you. You need to go to them, but unfortunately, there was no way I could that night. His wife had a baby that day, and he was in some kind of depression and just couldn't handle it, so he shot himself. But you just can't do everything. But in fact, in my Business Student Council groups were people like Senator Tom Coburn, and people are always surprised. Well, Coburn's a medical doctor. How could he be a medical doctor and be in the business school? Well, he was in the business school, outstanding student, and when he graduated, he went to work for his dad's company that made the lenses for glasses in Muskogee, and he got cancer on the throat, and he worked with his doctor, and he got so impressed with his doctor, he decided to go to medical school, and did that. So we had some really outstanding people. Don Nichols was not a student of mine. He was also a senator, but he needed some help, and he'd come to see me. You develop a reputation. Here's a professor who helps students. And then I told you about Phi Gamma Delta. They needed an advisor, and they initiated me just to be an advisor. And that's now one of the top fraternities on campus. I think.
You were also Blue Key many years.
Blue Key. I was Blue Key advisor. They had Abe Hesser, who was the vice president, and they had really top-notch people. And so when I took over Blue Key, it was still, ever since I remember in the 50s, it was the top leadership fraternity for men on campus. And I loved that. We used to have initiation in my house. We'd have the parents come, and we'd fix sausage casserole for breakfast and biscuits and stuff, and made a big deal out of it. And in those days, they had to wear blue blazers, and they had badges that they wore, and I insisted that they dress well, wear white. I mean, I was an IBM guy, and I wanted them to look the part, and I instilled in them the concept of the Blue Key man. A Blue Key man is a man who proudly is a leader, but he's a servant leader. He looks after his people. And that was and today as a fundraiser, I go to those same people, and not only are they multimillionaires, we have several billionaires who were members of Blue Key. And so when I retired, and we sent out 300 letters to those students, and we said, we're going to establish a scholarship in Bob Ham's name. We got $250,000 in 2 months.
Great.
That was already exceeding our goal.
That's good.
So we were delighted about that. But
Bob, I've got to think you had to spend countless hours of your time, personal time, and you enjoyed it. I mean, truly, it was a sacrifice. What motivated you to work? I mean, and I'm not saying it's critically, but some professors who are doing a marvelous job of teaching and counseling students, but don't want to be engaged with students outside of the academic environment, but in leadership roles and other ways you're involved. What was your motivation for that, Bob?
I think it's a Christian motivation, really. I mean, the Bible was I always joke that I was born in the pew of a Baptist church. And the whole concept of Christianity, I think, is to help make people better, to be a servant leader. And I just saw that as this was a key time in the people's lives. And it was my life. I mean, I'm indebted to all those professors who encouraged me, and to get a doctorate degree, to get a bachelor's degree. Here's money, and I thought, here's my opportunity to pay those people back. But a student often has potential. Charlie Idle, CEO of Simmons, gives me way too much credit, but he was in dentistry, pre-dentistry, when he was a student. And he was a Blue Key member too. And I said, I met him one night at an event, and I said, Charlie, I don't know what you're majoring in, but you could make a outstanding marketing guy. And he said, you really think so? And I said, yeah. He said, if you make a D in some course in pre-dentistry, could you still be an outstanding? I said, those are the kind of people we like. So the next day he came over, and we enrolled him in the marketing program. Of course, he did really well and became president and CEO of several companies. And so, I think it was the ability to see great potential in people, and I didn't want it to waste. You want it to flourish, and I think they needed direction. So we sponsored. I always was looking for something to sponsor. So we started on campus a national prayer breakfast. We'd have 600 or 700 people come to a not a national one, really a campus prayer breakfast. And then some of the students and I went to the national prayer breakfast in Washington, D.C. to inspire the students to do that. Well, we'd end up having 700 people come to those events. Well, over the years, that's dwindled down, but I think it's all involved in leadership. We also sponsored major entertainment on campus to raise money. We made thousands of dollars back in the 60s and 70s. And then the university decided, well, we want to give that to some other group. We took transfer students from junior colleges, and we had a transfer student leadership program for them. Well, that was eventually taken over. And finally, I realized what we were doing, we were being the creative force to come up with ideas that other people wanted to take over later on. So we let them. We didn't fight it. We just said, fine, we'll go come up with some other idea. And now they're involved in some projects to help poor people in Mexico and other places like that. So they're always coming up with new ideas, which I really like that concept.
Bob, you alluded to kind of earlier, a lot of these, the mentoring and student relationships you did led to lifelong relationships later.
Yes.
And the purpose for development was not for what they would do later, it was in the moment. But yet, one of the offshoots of that is the relationship they had come back and serving on advisory groups, business associates.
Right.
And can you speak to the value of those kind of relationships at the college?
Well, one of the things I think you have to remember is you can't be involved in students' lives. If like you have 300 or 400 students, you can't. What you can do is identify some people that you can really mentor, and you can mentor 4, 5, 6 people a year. And during that year, whether they're a master's candidate, doctoral candidate, or even an undergraduate, you can mentor that person. And if you mentor that person for a year, they don't forget you. If you just come to a class, they're going to forget at the end of the semester typically who you are. But then, as they continue on, you keep that relationship going with maybe it's be Christmas cards, or maybe today it's really easy with email, and you get. And then last week I got a picture of a couple. I bet I've been in more weddings than anybody in the United States. By these kids get married and then invite me to be in their wedding, and they're out in California now, and had a baby. Well, they emailed me pictures of the baby. Now, we didn't do that to raise funds. That wasn't the mission. The mission was just to help them at a critical time in their life. But it turned out that those relationships were really helpful in supporting the university also. And as I see, I don't believe a university has a heart. Only people have hearts. And so the people who graduated and went on financially are supporting the university, supported so we can invest money in more students, so more students can receive the benefit of that. And so to me, that has been the real joy of watching that. So when I was chairman, for example, of Jim Romas's doctoral committee, then he had eventually Julie Weathers. Now she had her doctor's degree with him, so you have that academic son, that academic granddaughter, and it goes on and on and on and on. And that's a real joy in that. It's some of my students are 60 years old now. And if you look at my BlackBerry, you'll see 300 and some odd names in there, people, some of which were students in the 1960s, but we're still in touch with each other. We'll call up and for example, one of them, Dennis McNeil, is married to the former president of Victoria's Secret's fragrance division. Mm-hmm. And he called me up one day. He said, "Why don't you come down to our mansion in Antigua?" And I said, "Well, I don't have a reason why I'm not." So I went down and spent a week there. Mm-hmm. Charlie Idle says, "Come down to Naples, Florida, and spend a week with us." Well, that's my reward now for 40 years ago.
That's great. What during the period that you were there, Bob, you worked with a lot of deans, a lot of administrators. Mm-hmm. Are there some special personalities that stand out in your mind? People made tremendous contributions to the, and I keep saying the college. I know it's now currently the school,
Right,
school of
right,
business,
yeah,
but
right.
you were there, so we'll call it the college.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's any question that one of the turning points in the College of Business was when Dick Poole took over for 10 years, because he was the one who permitted us to hire really outstanding professors and sort of start off in a whole new direction of quality and direction. And he understood the market system. You've got to pay good professors. And at that time, academics. I mean, I started off making $10,500 a year, and I don't think the deans were making a whole lot more. I know the president, I think, was making $45,000 a year in 1966. But I mean, he really set a very high standard for people. He told me one time, he said, "I'd fire you except you're so productive." And I always remember that comment, and I said, "Well, I feel the same about you." You know, we laughed about that later on. Still laugh about it. But then we had some deans who were they lacked the professionalism, I thought, that we needed. And a lot of people just wanted to maintain. Universities are not like businesses. They're much more of a consensus builder, and I don't agree with that philosophy very much myself. I think we don't have a lot of visionary people in the whole world, and if you're lucky enough to get somebody with vision, you have to go with them and their vision, and we lack that in some cases. And by that I mean in professional, just in dress, not understanding that we need to have a school of accounting. That caused conflicts, and eventually that Dean Miller, was fired, and because people just didn't see he had a real strong leadership position. We've had people who basically maintained and enjoyed the fact that we had a good school of business. And then we had, again, some people that were not very good. And now we're involved in trying to get a new building and reaching new heights. And
I want to kind of share some more with you.
Yeah.
I want to stop here for a second. Bob, we were talking about deans and kind of direction leadership
Right.
at college, and could you kind of continue on some of your comments there?
Yeah, I think I'm not being critical of necessarily people, but we just didn't have sometimes the right people there at the right time, and it doesn't help. And having a guy like Dick Poole, who was a visionary, and he was a very strong personality, or is a very strong personality, had benefits. I mean, he was the one who saw the building completed, the 1966, the existing building, and he ensured that it was well taken care of. For example, even before we got to Breathe Easy program, no smoking in the building. One day he saw a guy smoking he thought he was smoking a cigar in a classroom. His professor, actually, he was holding a cigar in his hand, and he walked by and saw him. He went in there and told the guy he couldn't smoke his cigar. And the guy wasn't even smoking, but that was and he wasn't a business guy. So the other dean, I understand, called and said, "I appreciate if you didn't chew my faculty out in front of your class." But I didn't hear that conversation, but it was well documented that happened. But he was a very strong person. I mean, everybody agrees that, and I think he would say the same thing. But he accomplished a great deal, and really the first guy that did any fundraising for it. Virgil Miller was a very nice guy, very dependent on me as a consultant and advisor, but he lacked, things like wearing white shoes and white belts and things. He just didn't ingratiate himself with either business people or faculty, And so he was one that got fired. I remember I was on a business trip and I came back and I got called over to the vice president's office, Jim Boggs, and he said, Bob, we need your approval. We want to have a consensus to fire Virgil Miller. Well, he was the one who pointed me to extension, and so I didn't want to fire him, and we had a good personal relationship, and I always saw my job as trying to help people, not trying to fire people. So I told Dr. Boggs, I said, "No, you don't have my approval to fire him." And he said, "Well, I want to take it 100% to the president before we fired him." And I said, "Well, you tell the president for me, or I will tell him that it's not a consensus. You got 7 people, but you don't have 8." He said, "Okay." He did not argue with me. But anyway, he fired him for that reason. And I can't remember all of the we had, of course, Sandmeyer was 17 years, or 18, something like that, as dean. And then we've had several interim deans, Gerald Age, and the interim deans are mostly maintainers. Greg Mosier was an interim dean, and I thought he was a very capable guy. And he is now the dean at University of Nevada, Reno, and is doing an outstanding job out there. So we've had some interim deans John Bale was also an interim dean. But most of them, they know they can't come up with a great vision and great objective because they're not going to be there that long. But those people, those incidents keep you from moving forward. Now, we've been very blessed in the last year that we had Malone Mitchell give it. Malone Mitchell gave $26 million to start a Department of Entrepreneurship, and we hired Dr. Mike Morris to head that up. Well, that program should be top 2 or 3 programs in the country in 4 years. I mean, it should just be tremendously outstanding because he has the vision and the leadership to make it happen. And we have a new director of the Center for Entrepreneurship, which she is a very capable person also. So I'm expecting great things out of that. I'm a little disappointed that we have not been able to move forward on our building. 3 years ago, it was decided that we were going to be a high priority for a new building on campus. And today, 3 years later, we still don't have the plans for the business building finished. And so it's been difficult. Well, why is that so important that you're, a year behind or so? Well, what we've learned in the last year, really in the last 7 or 8 months, is that there is a point in time when a lot of your donors have a lot of money, and then there's a point when they may not have any. And we have one of the billionaires I was talking about a while ago was willing to help us with several $1 million. Well, now he's saying I can't do that. So there was a point we should have done that when we were capable of doing that, and that's why I think Burns Hargis, with his vision for faculty professorships, his timing was impeccable because we got the money before the decline in the housing market and the decline in the oil business. So we were very fortunate to get that.
Bob, is the new dean, Sarah Friedman, been supportive of the entrepreneurship program, fundraising, and things you're talking about?
Yeah, but I think she's supportive of it, but it was after the fact. I mean, this was, and people will think this is sort of interesting. I think that sometimes somebody fortuitously comes in and says, I have an interest in entrepreneurship, for example, and here's the money to do it. There's the opposite of that, where the dean says, I think we need to have a flagship program, and that flagship program should be entrepreneurship, Now you guys go out and raise the money for it. Well, we did it backwards, and it wasn't a design, as far as I know, that we were going to have that as a flagship program. We have it as a flagship program because the donor wanted to do it. And entrepreneurship is the undercurrent of all business because it's encouraging people at any level, particularly small business level, to go into business. And in fact, one of the programs I'm working on right now is to help disabled American veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan war. We're trying to help them through this entrepreneur program to get them into small business so that they won't be staying at home depressed and not feeling enthusiastic. And we're going to develop a great program. The program's already developed. It's just raise the money so we can carry it out. And so we're going to have national reputation in this, but it wasn't some master visionary design. And I wish that we had that. I don't think we have that on paper, at least, to say our goal is to have the best school of accounting in the region, or be one of the best 50. We've had people who wanted to do that. They didn't know how to carry it out. It's not easy to get academic leadership. We're not trained to academic leadership. We're trained to be researchers. We're trained to be teachers to some degree. We're trained to do outreach programs to some degree, but we're primarily trained as PhDs to do research. And that may be a totally different personality in order to be a leader of a group of academicians.
Bob, what, kind of broadening our scope, maybe moving up to about 30,000 feet, kind of looking down over the years, what have you feel like been some major accomplishments of the college, milestones that you can recall?
Well, that's a good question. And, one of the first ones, I think, was a transition from an old building, Morrill Hall, to a new building, which gave you new status. The faculty awareness and the awareness of the university that you had to pay market rates to get good faculty. I think that was a turning point, that we could go out and really hire really good people.
Compete nationally.
Yeah, people. You could have people with national and regional reputations as a member of your faculty. I think that was a turning point. The School of Accounting, which was the flagship program for a long time, I think having a guy with great vision like Dr. Anderson really gave that program so much emphasis, and every person in the department met very high standards. He was a person with extremely high standards.
And Will was a good marketer too, and he
promoted
his department well.
And fundraiser. Mm-hmm. Yep, he promoted it. He fundraised it. He hired people. He was an outstanding teacher himself, textbook writer. I mean, he really was the epitome of the ideal person for a campus. But there are not many people like that. Most people are one or the other. It's difficult to be an outreach person relating to the community, relating to the students, and relating to the highest levels of academic research. But I think hiring certain people had made a major difference.
Moving a new building, the faculty hires.
Yeah, those were major things. But starting the School of Accounting was a major, turned out to be a major thing. I think, of course, I may be prejudiced, but I think the fact that we started really developing an outreach program where we're now have won national awards for our outreach program. The business forums, the Tulsa forums, the economic outlook conferences, the oil conferences, all of those things today set the university apart from other universities, certainly in the state and in the region. And when you can win national awards for your outreach program, that speaks very highly of what you're accomplishing there. So, I mean, that has to be one of the major turning points. the problem that we have is that we're human, and eventually, even good faculty members are going to get old, and they're not going to be as enthusiastic and vital and dynamic as they were. And as I've said to our new dean, they're at that high peak now. We're going to be losing 35% of our faculty in the next 3 years because of age. This is a really great time for us to hire really outstanding people with a vision in certain areas that we haven't had it for the last few years. So, I mean, we're at a very important step right now, and having that new building, faculty members are particularly young faculty, like everybody else, they want to move into a new building and have nice offices, and that would be important. So we really are behind in keeping up with the facilities.
Bob, following on some of your comments, what are some of the things you think the college needs to do in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, 10 years, whatever?
Well, I think back to the same point, they need to hire that 35% that's leaving. They need to get some really outstanding faculty in those positions. And some people who not only have great research, but great leadership ability to lead in finance and marketing and in management and some of those other areas in the future. Mm-hmm. When the existing people are exiting, somebody else can follow up and come right behind them. Mm-hmm. You need somebody who is a young faculty member that you can develop to take over and keep that momentum going. A new building is a critical thing. The Tulsa program, by the way, the former dean of the business school who went there, that program is a vital part of what we do on this campus, the main campus, because their MBA program is growing. A lot of executives are going to that program. It's very well received in the Tulsa market.
Continue to grow that program.
Yeah, and that program will continue to grow, probably maybe faster momentum than it does on this campus. So that would have to be something that would be identified not only as a major accomplishment, but something that's really meeting the needs of Oklahomans in a better way.
Well, what maybe a little philosophy, a little bit, but what twofold question. One, what do you think over the years has been the strength or the strengths, the core values of the college?
Well, I think a few people, unconsciously, maybe they were thinking about their own area, but what they did is they were role models for other people, and primarily that is to be able to relate to the business community. And so what we were doing, particularly in accounting and marketing, maybe in banking, IT, or MIS, they were trying to prepare students to do well in industry, which I think is an important value. We're not just trying to train you to memorize something and regurgitate it back on tests. We want to train you so when you're in industry, you'll be able to make good decisions. And that's why people like me are disappointed when you see somebody who's in the White House who has a MBA from Harvard. You say, you should have made a lot better decisions than that, because MBA is supposed to be able to make good decisions.
You shouldn't be making more money even.
Exactly. So the whole point of, I think, a core value is training people, educating people, instilling in people a holistic viewpoint. We would like for students to have an appreciation for arts and music, sports, and so we have sports management programs. We have arts management programs, and we don't want a person to leave and say, well, I don't appreciate the other things than just my little field. And on the other hand, we're not trying to train salespeople. We're trying to train managers and executives. and that's why we're increasingly looking for great internship programs. We're increasingly look for scholarship programs. And we're increasingly looking for programs that would internationalize the students. Don't put your blinders on and think you're going to stay right here in Oklahoma. And most of our students, in fact, don't.
How important going forward, Bob, is the international component to education?
Well, I agree with the provost that we should have every student before they graduate have some experience overseas. I mean, it ideally would be an internship program. Many of the students we had in marketing were interested in international marketing. In fact, one of our graduates of OSU is the department head of the graduate program at the University of South Carolina international program. Someplace along the way they were instilled in the importance of international. But it's really critical. We're not, as never before, we are more involved overseas. Like my own son, I adopted a little boy, 6-year-old, when I lived in China as a Fulbright professor. Well, where is he today? Well, he graduated in marketing from OSU, of course. He didn't have much choice on that. And then he attended Thunderbird on the internet. And now he and his wife are living in China running a corporation. So, it's a strange world where one time you're here, or in Atlanta, as he was for 6 years with Simmons Bedding Company as part of their Eastern Hemisphere management program. But now he's back over in China running companies. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we'd like to see. We don't want to see him just get a small job in a small company to stay there. We want to have at least the vision to do greater things than that.
Bob, what reflecting back on your career, what have been some special memories, special moments for you?
Well, a lot of things happen in 40 years. The night I told you about the man who committed suicide, that really impacts you. And then later on that night, just as we were having the banquet, somebody came up to me and said it had just been announced that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I remember going into the business banquet, and we waited till it went through the whole process, and at the end walking up and saying, "We have a major announcement tonight that Martin Luther King was assassinated." That had nothing really to do with the university, but it was a very significant event that occurred. Of course, I'm not a great sports person, but I have a great love for Charlie Weatherby, who was quarterback when we beat OU. That you have to throw that in the mix someplace. That we're always glad when we beat OU in football, even though it doesn't happen often. I mean, I think everybody has that enthusiasm. The day a student comes in, I remember this gal, and she came in. She said, "I think I really want to be an airline stewardess." And I said, "Well, why don't you contact the airline and tell them, why are you telling me?" And she said, "Well, I don't know how to do it." And I said, "Well, let's get out the phone book." We got the phone book and found American Airlines, and we called them and asked them, "How do we apply for a job there?" And they told us. She applied for the job, and she came in a couple of weeks later and put her arm around me and kissed me on the cheek, and she said, "Dr. Hamm, I got the job as an airline stewardess." Well, you don't, those moments you don't forget very much. When your doctoral student comes in and says, "Hey, guess what? I got a job at Memphis State University," like Lee Manzer did, or Tom Brown called me from California and said, "I've just been named dean at a university in California." Well, those are great moments.
Lee Manzer was one of your
Lee Manzer, unfortunately, was a student of mine too, and stole a lot of my better jokes, I must say. And so I told him I'd never let him have a copy of my book because he'd just, steal my stories out of it. But I love Steve Lee. He's a great guy. But many of the pleasures I've had here, I know this may sound almost cheesy, but for years at graduation, I stood at the bottom of the steps. So as a student came across, they came down the steps. Well, if they needed some support, well, I put my hand out and help them. And I got, I don't know how many hugs over the years from the girl students, and I thought, that you can't replace that feeling. When a guy comes in your office and says, Rob Reynolds, for example, Dad was General, or his father-in-law was General Tinker Field. He said, I want you to come and read the scripture at my wedding. Well, how do you put a price on that? You can't. And now, 27 years later, they come by your house with their teenage children and said, hey, I want you to meet the professor we had in school. Well, there's no value that you can put on that. It's just unbelievable. The priceless, as they say in the advertisement. Most of the highlights of my life are not the highlights of my life as much as the highlights of somebody else's life that I feel a part of. Senator Nichols, I remember he was at a banquet I was at one night, and he said, I'd like to talk to you. Or his aide came over and said, Senator Nichols wants to talk to you. And I thought, oh, he probably wants me to go to Washington and help him, my ego. So he and I go get a cup of coffee together, and he says, Professor, I never did really thank you for helping me in college. And of course, I don't remember even helping him. But when you help people, U.S. senators, there's just a good feeling about that. I think one of the highlights, of course, is academically is getting the PhD program here. Because I worked on that for a couple of years before we ever were able to get that approved, and that was something that go on today and 100 years into the future. For me, the outreach program, starting it, getting it to move, accepted by the business community in Oklahoma, I think is a phenomenal achievement for our group that did that. But it's also something that's going to continue on forever. Of course, one of the biggest highlights for me was personally the $250,000 scholarship they established in my name for retirement, and then later on being inducted into the Oklahoma Higher Education Hall of Fame was a major thrill for me.
Bob, how about some of your recognition? I think the Redskin one year, the student yearbook recognized you as outstanding professor of the year, teacher of the year. Mm-hmm. You've had several college departmental recognitions, and then your recognition for your work with different organizations. Have those been special to you?
Yeah, I know it's wonderful. I was I know even after I retired and I came back and they asked me to be the Blue Key Advisor again. I think it's my third time, and they nominated me for the Outstanding Advisor of the Year, and I got that award at the National Convention. You have to be really careful as a professor that you're going to get criticized. You look at ratemyprofessor.com, for example, you'll have students that don't rate you very high. And then up here, you get these great accolades for, distinguished alum or National Advisor of the Year. I was National, International Faculty of the Year one year for somebody who works with international students without that being part of their job, just as a faculty member. Well, those are really nice things up here. Down here, maybe criticism. But you've got to level that and stay in between the fence posts here, because you get to thinking too highly of yourself. And I think that's a potential danger as a faculty member. it's great to have those honors. But you have to remember, it's your job. It's your job is to train students, to help students, educate students, mentor students, and of course, if you do that, you're going to get accolades. I mean, you can't help it if you do a good job. And if you don't do a good job, you're not going to get those. But I've just always thought you need to have a really good understanding of who you are. But it's nice to have.
It is. Bob, what part of your, to use the phrase, true north, to mean your spirituality?
Yes.
Would you care to share some of that, how it's affected your life and your career?
Yeah, well, I think when you grow up and you go to Sunday school class particularly, you don't realize how much it's affecting your philosophy of life. And, I always said that Jesus was the most outstanding teacher that ever lived. And how did he teach? He taught using parables. He taught using stories. He used examples. That doesn't mean he didn't give you great concepts, or he didn't give you great instructions. Go and give all you have to the poor and follow me. That was pretty direct. And of course, the guy didn't do it. But it seems to me you have to have that whole gamut of teaching. You need to inspire the students to do that. And to me, following that example would be the absolute highest priority. If you could not only accept his philosophy and his teachings, but also to try to live that kind of a life. I know one day after class was over one semester and the grades were in, this student came up to me and he said, "You have something that I want." And I go, "Is it my Mercedes or my house? What
my
are you
good
talking?"
looks,
My good looks. Yeah. That was never a question. And he said, "Well, you have a contentment about you that I'd like to have." And I said, "Well, the only thing I can tell you, I'm contented because I feel that God is going to look after me as well for in the future." And he said, "How did you find that?" And so I shared that with him, and he eventually became a Christian and eventually became a minister. And I introduced him to a girl that ended up becoming his wife. And that was one of those Christian high points. When he was baptized, I remember I was there and I was upstairs and he was in the locker room getting dressed for the baptism. And this bird flew down and sat in the window. And I was sitting there looking at that bird and he came out and I said, "God is rejoicing tonight because you're becoming a Christian." He sent this bird as a sign.
This dove had come down out of the water.
It wasn't a dove, but it was just a bird sitting there chirping away. And I belong to we have a Christian faculty group on campus, and I belong to that and talk to them. In fact, when I was on semester at C, I even gave sermons on there. When I was in the MBA program, we had a group of students who used to go out to small towns, and I'd lead singing, even though I can't sing a note, but I can wave my arm really good and smile, and I said, "Okay, let's all sing number 87," and that worked out really well. And that was one of the neatest spiritual experiences of my life. I remember one night we went we were at this little church. It was sort of like a rectangle box, and we were back in the back, and we started to pray about that service that night as students. We were all students, and we said, we hope that people will come and listen. That's all we were trying to do. We opened the door to go out there, and the church was packed, and people were standing outside looking in the windows. And the guy got up and did his thing, and we had songs, and the guy got up and told what Christ meant to him. It was one of the most spiritual moments of my entire life. Was that. But I think students I think they sense in you that you have a spiritual dimension. And later on in my life, I was a fellow at the University of Missouri, and my subject was spirituality in the workplace. And so I've done some research in that area too. But my whole life has always been, I know this is really terrible to say that and politically incorrect. I remember when I was first went out on dates and driving my parents' car, and my mother said to me, "Remember, Jesus is riding in the back seat." And I said, "Well, it's going to get awful crowded with three of us back there." She didn't think that was very funny, but I mean, it's just the lifestyle that we had, that we were supposed to do that. And then when my son Kevin, eventually, after he was here several years, and he was, I think, 14, and one day he came to me and he said, "Dad, I want to become a Christian." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Why?" And he says, "Well, because the way you have instructed me and the way all of your friends are, I want to be like them. What do they have?" And that was a major Christian event in my life, But I don't think you need to go and make a big announcement. Hey, I'm a Christian, or I'm this or not. And Bob Comm, who was a major influence in my life here, he said to me one day, we had some Muslim students here, and he said they wanted to have a place to pray. And he said, I told them there's a place in the library, a room they could go in and pray. And he said, you should always let everybody have their place to express their spirituality, not in a march or all this other stuff. We even used to have religious emphasis weeks on campus.
I remember that.
A long time ago, and I can still tell you, we had an astrophysicist came and shared his faith one time, and I still remember, gosh, this guy is an astrophysicist and a Christian. So it's always been a very important part of my life, and particularly selecting your friends. You have to. I think you have to be careful who your friends are.
Bob, stepping back a little bit again, looking at what do you feel has been your legacy here at OSU? And I know you wouldn't use that word I'm using, but what have you left of value, do you think, in your career?
Well, besides the scholarships, I think I was at Sam's Club Sunday afternoon, and I ran into a lawyer in Edmond. And he said, gosh, I am so glad to see you. And he was one of my former students. He said, you don't realize how many students that you've had that still talk about you. And I said, well, I appreciate that. And he said, no, I'm serious. And he said, you know what your legacy is? And I said, no. And he said, making people think. And I thought about that a lot in the last few days. And I thought, if you could make people think, is this the right thing to do? Is this the best I can do? Is this the right solution for, like the Bob Comm situation? Is that the best solution for everybody concerned? Does it hurt anybody that they're over here praying? No. Would it hurt if we had rallies against that? Yes. That's what I'm talking about. And for example, when I was in China, I went there primarily to help start an MBA program, which is, by the way, recently was selected the outstanding MBA program in China. And I've been there like 3 or 4 weeks. And I had two groups. One was 11 students who were older that they wanted to be faculty members. And then I had 40 students in a class. And so the dean came over to my apartment one night with the vice dean. And he said, Professor said, we have some problems with you. And I said, okay, let's talk about it. Because I'm very confident. Embarrassed to talk about problems. He said, you may not know this, but we have somebody in your class who checks on your class. And I said, yes, I know it is. The guy sits on the far left. He said, yes. He said, he's complaining that you don't write on the blackboard every word you say, and then you ask the students to tell you what you said on the blackboard. And I said, yeah, well, that's true. What's wrong? What's the problem here? Well, in the Chinese culture, we write everything down, and the students are supposed to tell us back what we told them. And I said, well, I'm not teaching that way. I am teaching people to think. So you put the concept, I said, over the centuries of education, there's been a lot of lies told. The earth is flat, is just one of them. You know, and I said, we've learned since then that the earth is round. And I said, you know, we cannot stifle education to occur by telling people this is the way it is. You have to say, this is what we know right now. You might come up with a better solution or better answer to that. And that's why I'm here. Maybe the way you're marketing your product right now is wrong. And you need to do a better job at this. And I said, let me give you an example. A guy seen me the other day. He went to New York, Chinese guy, worked for a trade company, went to New York, and he came back and he said, I didn't sell one towel. I didn't sell one sheet. And I said, well, do you have a sample? So he pulled it out of his suitcase and said, here's the towel we're trying to sell. I said, it was ugly. It wasn't pretty and anything. It wasn't heavy. It was just thin. And I took it and I just tore it apart. And I said, this is why your towels are not selling. It's too thin. It's okay for this culture, but not the American culture. Not tasteful. It's not pretty. It's got to be, you know, nice and fluffy. It needs to be big because they got bigger bodies and everything. And I said, you know, that guy didn't think. All he remembered is, I can make this and I want to sell this. He didn't ask the question, what do they want so that I can sell them this? And I said, I was really rude. I said, how many teaching awards have you won? He said, well, we don't have teaching awards. I said, well, I've won a whole bunch of them. So I would advise you to let the students find out how this works. So at the end of the semester, the dean comes back and he says, you know what, you're right. The students love the way you teach. Now they're thinking, but they're more critical. I go, oh, critical is a good word in education.
Not in their culture.
He said, we decided that we want you to teach all the faculty members how to teach. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he said, why not? And I said, because the faculty don't want to be taught how to teach differently. So I'm not going to do it.
Well, Bob, maybe one last question for you. How do you hope people remember Bob Hamm?
Well, I hope that they remember we cared about them. I hope they remember that we had a purpose. You know, our purpose was to make them not only a business person, a spiritual person, a person of high quality. I mean, I think that's always one of my goals. Is sometimes we were misunderstood. I think people say, "Well, you were too hard on me." Well, somebody else would probably say you're too easy. But I always try to figure out what do they need to make them better. Do they need to be encouraged? Do they need to be chewed out, or what do they need? And that's why I try to relate to them. What do they need in order to make them better, to move forward? And I think that was my major goal in life. And I think in general, I feel very, very comfortable that for a lot of people that worked out that way. And you know, Christmas, as it is season now, when you get several hundred Christmas cards from people that you don't see very often, they always write little notes in there, thanks for making me take that course, or thank you for chewing me out that time. I'll give you an example. This guy, I've never been able to tell this story before because I'd get in trouble, but there was a banker that I'd worked for. His son was here, and he said, I want you to look after him. Well, I never got around to meeting him. And I was at church one Sunday, and I had my arm on the pew, and I was sitting there and had my Bible in the pew, and it turned out his son was sitting right behind me, and his girlfriend. And I shouldn't be telling you the story, of course. But anyway, the guy was on crutches, broken his leg skiing. And so we stood up to sing, and he looked down at my Bible, had my name on it. And so as he was leaving, he said to his girlfriend, he said, did you see he was wearing a Rolex watch? He said, he's probably not a professor. And he said, yeah, well, what was his name? She said, well, I saw it. Bob Hamm was on his Bible. So we were walking out, and I got in my Mercedes. He said, that guy's driving a Mercedes. He can't be a professor. And so the next day I was in the business building, and here he came on his crutches. And he said, oh, we saw you at church yesterday. And I said, oh, yeah, I remember you were on crutches. And he said, would you be my advisor? He said, I want somebody successful to be my advisor. And I said, well, what are you majoring in? He said, marketing. I said, okay. Well, then he told me who he was. And I said, is your dad a banker? And I said, well, I was supposed to meet you anyway. So anyway, I had an apartment for rent because I had apartments in town that I'd purchased because I was afraid we couldn't live on our retirement pay, which turned out to be true. And so anyway, he lived in his apartment. Well, his girlfriend got pregnant. And so he came up to my office one day and he said, do you know my girlfriend's pregnant? And I said, no, I didn't know that. And he said, but I'm not going to marry her. He said, I've got another girlfriend now. And I just reached over and I popped him. I said, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. And of course, you'd get fired, for doing that today. Probably would have got fired then too. Fortunately, he didn't tell anybody. And I said, I'm ashamed of you. I said, you're not acting like I want you to act. The girlfriend's pregnant, it's, and now you're over there sleeping with some other girl in our apartments. I said, you're just not, you're embarrassment to me. And so he left. A couple of days later, he came back and he said, I thought, you're right. And so school was out, and they both moved back home to Bartlesville. And he decided after a while they were going to get married. And so they went down to get married at the Justice of the Peace. And it was too late. So they headed to the hospital and had a little baby boy. So on the way back from the hospital, they stopped at the Justice of the Peace and got married. Well, later on, they had 3 more kids. Found God and have had a great successful marriage with the 4 kids. But every once in a while I'll see him, and every Christmas I always hear a voice. He says, thank you for popping me that day. He said, you knocked sense into my head. Well, how much is that worth to you, And he's told his children, not the whole story, but, he's telling his story that Rob Reynolds, who was Pistol Pete, one of my kids, they brought the kids by and they said, Dad, is this the guy you were always talking about? Well, I mean, that's a legacy you'd like. So somebody said, hey, I had a great experience in college. This person mentored me, and I want you, son, I want you to meet him. So when they get to heaven, I want to come and look me up.
Bob, anything we hadn't covered with that chance? Not to share about the college?
Yeah, I think you did a good job. I think one of the things that we would be remiss in if we didn't talk about perceptions of the future of students today. And, what I see today is that we're much more selfish as students and faculty, both. We don't have the interaction. We don't advise students anymore. We have professional advisors. A lot of the classes are dependent on you can go to the internet and find the professor's lectures. And so you don't have that opportunity to get to know students and to mentor them and advise them on internships or jobs or whatever. And I see that as a loss for both sides, for the faculty as well as the students. And I hope that somehow we will learn how to connect and have a relationship with each other, because Oklahoma State University was built on relationships. When I used to participate in the freshman first week of school, and we'd have maybe 500 students in a deal, and I'd go in and I'd say, howdy, and they'd all start, howdy, howdy. I said, no, I can't hear you, say howdy. I'd get them really, just really speaking, yelling out, howdy. That was, it's called Howdy Week.
Howdy Week.
Howdy Week, yeah. And I'd walk across campus and students would, hey, howdy, Bob, howdy. I love that. See, I think we're missing that anymore. And I think, Burns is the guy, I think, who could bring back some of that. We do care about you attitude. Well, thank you for letting me do